or more focused and determined on leaving a legacy of being a great president? I genuinely believe, from speaking to him yesterday, that he feels he's got a mandate and a head of wind that can enable him to be an historic, transformative president. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he does have a mandate. I don't think it's based on 50% of the vote, or that's the first time a Republican had done that since George W. Bush in 2004. But all the issues that he embraced on the border, security, lessening crime, diminishing crime, foreign policy, building up reforms and building the Defense Department back up, DEI, cultural issues, all of them, the hyperinflation, he was polling about 60%. So he embraced issues that were about 60 to 65% across the board. Harris's team now is in retrospect saying, well, we didn't have the messaging right, or we should have done this, but that's not the problem. The problem was that all of the issues that they embraced did not warrant 50% support. So he thinks he has a mandate based on the issues rather than just the overwhelming. It was an overwhelming electoral college win. I think the other thing is he's kind of a Nietzschean figure. He figures that they've impeached him twice. They tried him as a private citizen. They tried to take him off the ballot in 16 states. They conducted 5 criminal and civil suits. I think you could call them lawfare. And there was 2 assassination attempts, and they all failed. So he feels that anything that didn't destroy him made him stronger. And there's nothing left that he has to worry about. Not that they won't try it again, but he feels that he's overcome all these things in the past.
Yeah, and also, of course, he's now, because he's won and is now the president, he can control that side of things. I mean, all the legal stuff's basically going away very, very fast. I want to play you a clip. This is from a podcast called On Pods Save America, where some top Harris Waltz campaign staff, including David Plouffe, who, of course, used to work for Obama, spoke out for the first time about some of the key decisions. Take a listen to this.
In a 107-day race, it is very difficult to do all the things you would normally do.
On the trans attack, obviously it was a very effective ad at the end. I ultimately don't believe that it was about the issue of trans. I think that it made her seem out of touch.
If there's a belief that if only we had responded to this trans ad with national and huge battleground state ads, we would have won. I don't think that's true.
She was ready, willing to go on Joe Rogan. Would it have changed anything? It would have been it would have broken through, not because of the conversation with Joe Rogan, but because the fact that she was doing it.
Listening to them, Victor, I just got the feeling of people who really don't really understand how they've managed to lose so badly, when in fact I think it's reasonably straightforward. A very poor candidate who'd been a very poor candidate the first time she tried to run as a Democrat nominee and was rejected very quickly by her own side, who recognized she was not very good. But secondly, Trump was massively better trusted to potentially fix the cost of living crisis and the illegal immigration crisis. And also because he represented what he called in his victory speech a core of common sense. And that Kamala Harris represented, as that very effective trans ad showed, she was for they, them, Trump's for you. In that one very simple ad, there was the difference between the two parties and the two candidates. One is common sense. Of course, you can't have biological men ruining women's sport. The other one was, yeah, of course you can. And I do think it was that 3-pronged thing, plus what you just said about the fact he took on the lawfare. They tried to jail him, they tried to shoot him and so on. All that helped him. But do you think those 3 things ultimately were what drove people to vote for him?
Oh, yeah, I think that's exactly on the money. And I mean, they've offered all sorts of excuses that they only had 100 days. Well, Trump only had 100 days. In fact, he had months that he was dealing with courts and suits and fines. He was tied up and off the campaign trail. But the thing that the marquee theme was he was able, for the first time in my lifetime, to replace racial tribalism with class solidarity. In other words, he said to people, if you're a Mexican-American truck driver, if you're a black electrician, if you're a poor white carpenter, you have more in common with each other than you do with your elites on the bicoastal domain. In other words, the people at Stanford University do not represent the working man in Michigan, or the Latino, La Raza, Latinx media spokesperson does not represent the people I'm living around right now here in the San Joaquin Valley. And that was a radical idea. And if you look at the actual data from the 2016, 2020, and 2024, he really didn't increase much the white working class or the white vote at all. And he was about the same. He went up a little bit with women, but where he made unbelievable gains were in Mexican Americans, Native Americans, Asians, and African Americans. And had he not made those gains, he would not have won. And that's what they do not want to confront, because that's the keystone of the Democratic Party: victim, victimization, victimizers, oppressor, oppressed. And they have this kind of Marxist binary, and people don't buy into it. And especially minorities don't buy it. They don't like, I think a key signature thing real quickly was in Obama. It was an iconic moment when he took those African-American activists, very intelligent young men, and took them to the side and said, "You don't know what's good for you. You're a captive to racism and sexism, and I can tell you what your real interests are."
Yes.
That was kind of revealing.
It was so condescending and patronizing. And it was he may as well have said, "You have to vote for Kamala because she's black like you." And actually, I think you've brought up a great point, which is, I think a lot of the voting for Trump in the end was colorblind. They just weren't voting because of ethnicity. They were voting for a common shared concern about big issues, which Kamala Harris simply wasn't able to articulate any meaningful policy about. And I always say to people, whatever you think of Trump, his position on things is very crystal clear. You know, there's no ambiguity. He's one of the great marketers in the history of politics. And you know what he stands for. But rather like with Hillary back in 2016, if you'd asked people on the streets of 20 major American cities all over the country, give me 5 things she stands for, they'd have really struggled to tell you. Whereas with Trump, they could have rattled them off with no problem. And I thought the same this time, that she eventually, having started off with, "We're going to have a joyful campaign," Kamala Harris very quickly morphed back to Hillary's way of doing things in 2016, which was basically call Trump a Hitler, a new Hitler, a Nazi, a fascist, and so on, demonize all his supporters, and then surround herself with very pampered prima donna multimillionaire celebrities and hope that their stardust would translate to votes. And it didn't. It didn't work for Hillary, and it didn't work for her.
I think there's 2 things I think you're getting at. Again, you're right on the money. There was this question of who was genuine and authentic. Trump, whatever the audience he addressed, he never modulated his accent. Kamala Harris does that. Hillary did it. Obama did it. He didn't change his clothing. He came out to a group of farmers. He didn't put on the Caterpillar hat, the boots. He always wore the tie. And whatever people thought of him, they thought, this is what you get.
Yeah.
The other thing was, this time around, unlike 2016 and 20, he was able to exude a message that it's okay to vote for Donald J. Trump. When he walked into Madison Square Garden, and you have Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Dana White, there was such a mixed ideologically diversity, middle class, it just exuded. And people started to say, I can say that I'm for Trump. If I'm a celebrity, I'm a media person, I'm not afraid anymore. And that really gave him a momentum, that he was ecumenical and he was bringing people in. I don't know how it's going to work when you have RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, all of these different people. But one thing that he was also saying finally was, whether it's good or bad, right or wrong, I'm not going to do what I did in 2016 and consult the wise men in the Beltway in the New York-Washington nexus. There's not going to be a Jim Mattis, a Rex Tillerson, a John Bolton. We're going to get people who are immune from the enticements of the administrative state. In fact, it's even weirder than that. He's appointing people that have been victims of the very agencies they're tasked to run, especially Jay Bhattacharya and NIH. That's a $50 billion grant. And if I were the people at Stanford University that tried to destroy him, that have hundreds of millions of dollars of health grants, it would not be a very comforting thought. Not that he's going to retaliate, but I don't think these people are going to be compromised, and you're not going to have an anonymous saying, I'm working inside the bowels of the administration.